I knew something was wrong the moment I looked out my living room window and saw Susan Pritchard standing in my driveway, her bright red parka unmistakable against the whiteout conditions of the January blizzard. What I did not expect was to watch her wrestle my brand new snow blower into the back of her white SUV, while the wind howled and snow piled up faster than anyone could clear it. My name is Oliver Shepard, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in suburban Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for exactly 3 years. 3 years of dealing with the most notorious HOA board president in the entire state. Or at least that is what I believed after countless interactions with Susan and her iron-fisted approach to neighborhood governance. She was 52 years old, with that particular hairstyle that seemed universal among women who demanded to speak to managers, blonde highlights that had not been updated since 2008, and an expression permanently fixed somewhere between disapproval and outrage. The snow blower she was currently stealing had cost me $1,200 just 2 weeks ago. I had splurged on the Honda model with tracks instead of wheels, knowing Wisconsin winters demanded serious equipment. I had used it exactly 3 times. I grabbed my phone and started recording through the window. The video was shaky because my hands were cold even inside my house. The heating system was struggling against the sub-zero temperatures outside, and the blizzard had knocked out power to half the neighborhood. My section still had electricity, but who knew for how long? Susan struggled with the machine for another minute before finally getting it situated in her vehicle. She slammed the rear door shut and hurried to the driver's seat, her face barely visible through the swirling snow. Within seconds, her SUV disappeared down the street, taillights fading into white nothing. I stood there processing what had just happened. The woman who had sent me 4 violation notices in the past month alone, ranging from my mailbox being the wrong shade of black to my garbage cans being visible from the street 15 minutes past the allowed time, had just committed theft. Not a minor infraction of HOA bylaws, but actual theft. Grand theft, given the value of the equipment. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. The Milwaukee Police Department was probably dealing with dozens of accidents and emergencies because of the storm. The news had been warning people for 2 days that this blizzard would be one for the record books, possibly dumping 30 inches before it was finished. I looked at my phone, at the video I had just captured, and made a decision. I would handle this through proper channels first, then escalate if necessary. The irony was not lost on me. Susan was obsessed with proper channels and procedures. Every violation notice she had ever sent me included citations of specific bylaw numbers, dates of infractions, and detailed explanations of the appeals process. She ran the HOA like a military operation, complete with regular patrols of the neighborhood in her white SUV, looking for any hint of non-compliance. I pulled up my contacts and found the number for Richard Morrison, the HOA vice president. Richard was a reasonable guy, a retired accountant who had lived in Meadowbrook Heights for 15 years. He had actually apologized to me privately after Susan sent me a violation notice because my Christmas lights were still up on December 27th. The phone rang 4 times before Richard answered. "Oliver, hey, everything okay? You still have power?" "I do, but that is not why I am calling. I just watched Susan Pritchard steal my snow blower out of my driveway." Silence on the other end. Then, "I am sorry, what?" "Susan took my snow blower. I have it on video. She put it in her SUV about 5 minutes ago and drove off." More silence. I could hear Richard breathing, could almost picture him trying to figure out how to respond to this. "Oliver, are you certain it was Susan? Visibility must be terrible out there. It was her. I have video. You want me to send it to you? Yes. Yes, send it to me. And Oliver, I am sorry, but I am not sure what you expect me to do about this right now. The roads are nearly impassable. I want this on record. I am going to file a police report, but I am also going to pursue this through the HOA. She is the board president. She represents all of us. This is theft, Richard. I understand. Send me the video. Let me see what we are dealing with. But Oliver, be careful with the police thing. I know you are angry, but think about the implications. The implications. She stole my property. What implications should I be worried about? Richard sighed. Just send me the video. We will talk when the storm passes. I hung up and immediately sent him the video file. Then I sat down on my couch and really thought about what I wanted to do next. Richard was right that involving the police would escalate this significantly. Susan Pritchard might be an overbearing nightmare of an HOA president, but having her arrested would create a firestorm in the neighborhood. On the other hand, she had stolen my $1,200 snow blower during a blizzard. The audacity of it was staggering. And why? Did she think I would not notice? Did she think the storm provided cover? Or did she simply believe she was entitled to take it? I picked up my phone again and called the Milwaukee Police Department non-emergency line. A tired-sounding dispatcher answered. Milwaukee Police, what is the nature of your issue? I want to report a theft. Someone stole my snow blower from my driveway about 10 minutes ago. I have video of the incident. The dispatcher took my information, address, and details about the incident. When I told her I knew who took it and where they lived, her tone shifted slightly. Sir, is this a neighbor dispute? No, this is theft. The person who took my snow blower is not entitled to it. She took it without permission during the storm. And you have video evidence, clear video. You can see her face, her vehicle, license plate, everything. Okay, sir, I am going to create a report. Given the weather conditions and current call volume, we may not be able to send an officer to take a statement until the storm passes. Is that acceptable? That is fine. I just want this documented. She gave me a case number and said someone would contact me within 48 hours. I thanked her and hung up, then spent the next hour watching the storm rage outside my window and refreshing my email to see if Richard had responded. He finally did, at 6:30 in the evening. Oliver, I watched the video. I honestly do not know what to say. That is definitely Susan, and that is definitely theft. I am going to call an emergency board meeting once the storm passes. In the meantime, I would suggest you secure your property and maybe invest in some cameras for your driveway. I am sorry this happened. This is not how the HOA should operate. His email was professional and sympathetic, which I appreciated. But I was still out a snow blower, and the storm was expected to continue through tomorrow night. By the time it was over, I would have at least 2 feet of snow to clear, possibly more. I thought about confronting Susan directly, driving to her house and demanding my property back. But the roads were dangerous, visibility was near zero, and I did not trust myself to stay calm if I came face to face with her right now. Better to let the process play out. The next morning, I woke up to complete silence. The wind had stopped, and when I looked outside, everything was buried. My car was a white mound in the driveway. The street had not been plowed. The sidewalk was invisible under at least 2 feet of fresh snow with drifts considerably higher. And I had no snow blower. I spent the next 3 hours shoveling my driveway by hand. My back screamed at me. My shoulders burned. Every time I paused to catch my breath, I thought about Susan Pritchard probably using my stolen equipment to clear her own driveway with ease. Around noon, I saw Richard Morrison walking up my driveway. He was bundled in a heavy coat and snow pants, his face red from cold and exertion. "Oliver, I wanted to check on you. I am clearing 2 feet of snow with a shovel because someone stole my snow blower. How do you think I am doing?" He nodded slowly. "Fair point. Listen, I talked to the other board members this morning. We are calling an emergency hearing for Susan. Given the severity of what happened, we are treating this as a violation of her duties as board president." A violation. Richard, she committed a crime. This is not about HOA bylaws. I understand, but we can only act within our authority. We can hold a hearing, we can potentially remove her from the board, but we cannot arrest her or force her to return your property. That is a legal matter. Fine. When is this hearing? 3 days from now. Tuesday evening, 7 o'clock at the community center. We will be notifying Susan today. You will need to present your case and she will have the opportunity to respond. I leaned on my shovel and looked at him. She will deny it, probably, but you have video evidence. That makes it pretty cut and dry. Does the HOA have any authority to compel her to return my property? Not exactly. But if we find that she violated her duties, we can impose fines and potentially remove her from her position. That might motivate her to make things right. It was not ideal, but it was something. Okay, I will be there Tuesday. Richard helped me finish shoveling my driveway before he left, which I appreciated. We did not talk much beyond small talk about the storm and how long it would take the city to dig out. By the time we were done, it was after 3 in the afternoon, and my entire body ached. I went inside, made coffee, and checked my email. Nothing from the police yet, which was not surprising given the conditions. I pulled up the video of Susan stealing my snow blower and watched it again, making sure I had not imagined the whole thing. Nope. There she was, clear as day, taking my property. The next 2 days passed slowly. The city crews gradually cleared the main roads, then the side streets. Life began returning to normal. I received a call from Officer Jennifer Hayes from the Milwaukee Police Department on Monday afternoon. "Mr. Shepard, this is Officer Hayes with MPD. I am calling about the theft report you filed on Saturday regarding a snow blower." "Yes, thank you for following up. I reviewed the video you submitted with your report. That is pretty clear evidence of theft. I would like to come by and take a formal statement from you. Would tomorrow work? I have an HOA hearing tomorrow evening at 7. Could you come before that?" "How about 3 o'clock? Perfect." Officer Hayes arrived promptly at 3 the next afternoon. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. She sat at my kitchen table with a laptop and a notepad, asking detailed questions about the incident. "And you are certain you did not give Miss Pritchard permission to use or borrow the snow blower?" "Absolutely not. I have had maybe a dozen conversations with her in the 3 years I have lived here, and all of them were about HOA violations she claimed I committed. We are not friendly. There is no way she could have reasonably believed she had permission." "Has she returned the snow blower or attempted to contact you since the incident?" "No." Radio silence. Officer Hayes made notes. "Okay. Based on the video evidence and your statement, I am going to recommend charges for theft. Given the value of the property, this would be a felony in Wisconsin. The district attorney will make the final decision on whether to prosecute." That stopped me for a moment. Felony charges. Susan Pritchard, HOA tyrant, potentially facing felony theft charges. What happens next? I will submit my report to the DA's office. They will review it and decide how to proceed. If they decide to press charges, a warrant will be issued and Miss Pritchard will be arrested. You might be called to testify if it goes to trial. How long does that process usually take? Could be a few weeks, could be a couple months. The system is backed up right now. But with clear video evidence, I would say the chances of prosecution are pretty high. After Officer Hayes left, I sat in my kitchen feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and anxiety. This had escalated beyond neighborhood drama into actual legal consequences. Part of me felt vindicated. Susan had been making my life difficult for years with her petty violation notices and power trips. Now she was facing real accountability, but another part of me wondered if I was being too harsh. Should I have just confronted her directly, demanded my property back, and let it go? Was pursuing criminal charges overkill? Then I remembered standing in my driveway for 3 hours with a shovel while she had probably used my expensive equipment to clear her own property, and my doubts evaporated. She had made a choice. Now she had to face the consequences. At 6:30, I left for the community center. The Meadowbrook Heights Community Center was a modest brick building near the entrance of our subdivision, mostly used for HOA meetings and the occasional neighborhood gathering. When I arrived at 6:45, the parking lot was surprisingly full. Inside, the main meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members would sit, and rows of folding chairs facing them. At least 30 neighbors had shown up, far more than the usual 5 or 6 who attended regular HOA meetings. Word had spread about what happened. I saw Richard Morrison talking to Karen Chen, the HOA secretary, near the front. He waved me over. "Big turnout tonight," I said. "People are curious. This is unprecedented. We have never had to hold a hearing like this for a board member, let alone the president." "Has Susan arrived yet?" "Not yet. She has been notified of the hearing and the accusations. She is required to appear, but technically we cannot force her." I found a seat in the 3rd row and waited. More neighbors trickled in, including my next-door neighbor, Margaret Wilson, a friendly retired teacher who had also been on the receiving end of Susan's violation notices. "Oliver, I heard what happened. Is it true? Susan actually stole your snow blower. I have it on video." Margaret shook her head. "That woman. I have been saying for years that the power went to her head. I hope the board does something about it this time." At exactly 7 o'clock, Richard called the meeting to order. The board members took their seats at the front table. Richard, Karen Chen, and Paul Hendricks, the treasurer. The seat where Susan usually sat remained empty. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending on such short notice. As you all probably know, we are here tonight to address a serious accusation against our board president, Susan Pritchard. Oliver Shepard has accused Miss Pritchard of theft, specifically of taking his snow blower without permission during the storm this past Saturday. Before we begin, I want to note that Miss Pritchard was notified of this hearing and required to attend. We will wait 5 more minutes before proceeding without her." The room buzzed with whispered conversations. I glanced at my watch, then at the door, wondering if Susan would actually show up. At 7:04, the door opened and Susan Pritchard walked in. She looked different than I had ever seen her. Usually, she carried herself with absolute confidence, chin up, shoulders back, ready to lecture anyone about mailbox colors or garbage can placement. Tonight, she looked diminished. Her face was pale. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in all the neighbors who had come to watch her humiliation. When her gaze landed on me, she froze. It was just for a second, but I saw it clearly. Her entire body went rigid, her eyes widened, and color drained from her face even further. She had not expected me to be here. Or maybe she had not expected the turnout. Or maybe the reality of what she had done finally hit her all at once. She recovered quickly, squaring her shoulders and walking to a chair near the front. But that moment of pure fear stayed with me. Richard cleared his throat. "Thank you for joining us, Susan. We are going to proceed with this hearing. Oliver Shepard will present his accusation, you will have an opportunity to respond, and then the board will make a determination. Oliver, would you please come forward? I walked to the front of the room, pulling out my phone. On Saturday, January 11th, at approximately 3:40 in the afternoon, I observed Susan Pritchard take my snow blower from my driveway without my permission. I recorded video of the incident. With your permission, I would like to play that video now. Richard nodded. Please proceed. I connected my phone to the TV mounted on the wall that the HOA used for presentations during meetings. The video played on the large screen, crystal clear despite the storm conditions. There was Susan, wrestling with my snow blower, loading it into her SUV, driving away. The timestamp was visible in the corner. Her license plate was clearly readable. The room was dead silent as the video played. When it finished, I disconnected my phone and returned to my seat. Susan, would you like to respond to this accusation? Richard asked. Susan stood up slowly. Her hands were shaking slightly, I noticed. I would like to explain what happened. During the storm, I was driving through the neighborhood checking on residents. The HOA bylaws state that board members have a duty to ensure the safety and welfare of the community during emergencies. When I drove past Oliver's house, I saw the snow blower in his driveway, abandoned in the storm. I was concerned that it would be buried or damaged, so I took it for safekeeping. I was planning to return it once the storm passed. The excuse was so absurd that someone in the audience actually laughed. I raised my hand. May I respond, please? Richard said. First, the snow blower was not abandoned. It was in my driveway, clearly on my property. Second, if Susan was so concerned about it being damaged, why did she not knock on my door? I was home. My lights were on. Third, she has not attempted to return it or contact me in the 4 days since the storm. And finally, if you look at the video, she did not handle that equipment like someone concerned about protecting a neighbor's property. She wrestled it into her SUV like she was stealing it, which is exactly what she was doing. More murmuring from the audience. Susan's face flushed red. How dare you accuse me of theft? I have served this community for 8 years as board president. I have dedicated countless hours to maintaining property values and enforcing our bylaws. This is how you repay me, with accusations and public humiliation. You stole my snow blower, Susan. This is not about your service to the community. This is about you taking something that did not belong to you. I was protecting it. Then give it back. Right now. We can go to your house together, you can return my property, and we can consider this matter closed. Susan opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Richard, at the other board members, then back at me. I do not have it anymore. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Richard banged his gavel on the table. Order! Everyone please quiet down. Susan, what do you mean you do not have it anymore? I sold it. I needed the money, and I did not think Oliver would mind since he clearly was not using it during the storm. I could not believe what I was hearing. She had not only stolen my property, she had sold it. You sold my $1,200 snow blower. To who? That is none of your business. It absolutely is my business. Susan, you sold stolen property. That is another crime. Richard intervened. Susan, I am going to give you one chance to make this right. Tell us who you sold it to. Help Oliver recover his property or compensate him for its value, and we can discuss how to move forward. If you refuse, I am calling for an immediate vote to remove you from the board. Susan looked around the room desperately. She was trapped and she knew it. Everyone could see it. The woman who had ruled Meadowbrook Heights with an iron fist for 8 years was cornered, and there was no way out. I sold it to a pawn shop, Cash America on North Teutonia Avenue. I got $400 for it. $400. She had stolen my $1,200 snow blower and sold it for $400. The rage I felt must have shown on my face because Margaret Wilson reached over and put a hand on my arm. Richard looked disgusted. "Susan, I am shocked and disappointed beyond words. You have violated the trust of this community and committed theft against one of our residents. I am calling for a vote right now. All board members in favor of immediately removing Susan Pritchard from her position as president and from the board entirely, say aye." "Aye," Richard said. "Aye," Karen Chen said. "Aye," Paul Hendricks said. The vote is unanimous. Susan, you are removed from the board effective immediately. I am also recommending that the HOA pursue legal action against you to recover the full value of Oliver's stolen property, plus any expenses he incurred. You need to leave now." Susan stood there for a moment, tears streaming down her face, but I felt no sympathy for her. She had made this bed and now she had to lie in it. "You are all going to regret this," she said quietly. "I've given everything to this neighborhood, and this is how you treat me. You will see. Things will fall apart without me." She grabbed her purse and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The room exploded into conversation. Richard banged his gavel again. "Folks, please. We still have business to discuss. Oliver, I apologize on behalf of the board. This should never have happened. We will work with you to recover your property or get you compensation." After the meeting ended, at least a dozen neighbors came up to me to express their support and share their own stories about Susan's behavior over the years. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had progressively become more controlling, more punitive, more convinced of her own authority. Several people mentioned that they had been considering moving because of the hostile HOA environment she had created. I drove to Cash America the next morning as soon as they opened. The manager, a tired-looking guy named Marcus, listened to my story and checked his records. "Yeah, we bought a Honda snowblower on Saturday evening. Paid $400 cash, but we already sold it yesterday to a customer. I can give you the sales records for your insurance claim, but the machine is gone." I asked if he could identify Susan from a photo, and he confirmed it was her who had sold the snow blower. He printed out copies of all the paperwork, which I would need for the police and potentially for court. When I got home, Officer Hayes called me. "Mr. Shepard, I have an update. The district attorney reviewed the case and has decided to file charges, felony theft, and now also a charge related to selling stolen property. There is a warrant out for Susan Pritchard's arrest. I wanted to let you know before you heard about it from someone else. Thank you, officer. I appreciate you keeping me informed. You should know that she might try to contact you, either to apologize or to convince you to drop the charges. I would recommend not engaging with her directly. Let everything go through official channels." That afternoon, I saw Susan Pritchard being arrested. I was not there in person, but Margaret Wilson called me because she had witnessed it from her living room window. According to Margaret, 2 police officers had shown up at Susan's house around 2 in the afternoon. Susan had answered the door. They had talked briefly, and then they put her in handcuffs and took her away in the squad car. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The HOA held an election to replace Susan, and Richard Morrison was elected as the new president with overwhelming support. His first act was to pass a motion to reimburse me for the full cost of my stolen snow blower, $1,200, which the HOA would then attempt to recover from Susan through civil court. The check arrived 2 weeks later. I used it to buy an even better snow blower, and this time I built a locked shed in my backyard to store it. Susan's case moved through the court system surprisingly quickly. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA was not interested in being lenient. The case went to trial in early March. I testified. The video was shown as evidence. The pawn shop manager testified about Susan selling the stolen property, and the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. The judge sentenced Susan to 2 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 1 year, plus restitution of $1,200 to me and court costs. Her lawyer had argued for probation, but the judge was unmoved. "Miss Pritchard," the judge said during sentencing, "you held a position of trust in your community. You were elected by your neighbors to lead your homeowners association. Instead of serving your community with integrity, you used your position to harass residents and ultimately to commit theft. The fact that you stole from someone during a natural disaster when people needed to help each other makes this even more egregious. The sentence stands." I watched Susan's face as the sentence was read. She looked small and broken, nothing like the imperious HOA president who had ruled Meadowbrook Heights for 8 years. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but then I remembered all the violation notices, all the power trips, and the absolute audacity of stealing my snow blower during a blizzard. After the trial, life in Meadowbrook Heights slowly returned to normal. Pritchard proved to be an excellent HOA president, focused on genuine community needs rather than petty enforcement of trivial rules. The first thing he did was revise the bylaws to eliminate some of the more ridiculous regulations Susan had championed, like the rule about garbage cans not being visible from the street or the restriction on certain mailbox colors. Property values actually increased over the next year, contrary to Susan's dire predictions about the neighborhood falling apart without her leadership. Turns out people are willing to pay more to live in a community with a reasonable HOA rather than one run by a tyrant. I ran into Susan's husband, David, at the grocery store about 6 months after the trial. He looked exhausted and defeated. We made brief eye contact, and I expected him to confront me or say something about ruining his wife's life. Instead, he just nodded and walked away. Margaret Wilson told me later that David had filed for divorce while Susan was in prison. He sold their house in Meadowbrook Heights and moved to a condo somewhere in Wauwatosa. I felt bad for him. He had always seemed like a nice guy, quiet, overshadowed by his wife's forceful personality. He was probably just as much a victim of Susan's behavior as the rest of us. Susan was released from prison after serving 14 months. She did not return to Meadowbrook Heights. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Minnesota to live with her sister and was working at a Target. The image of imperious Susan Pritchard in a red polo shirt helping customers find the right size of paper towels was almost too surreal to imagine. The snow blower she stole from me lasted for 5 more winters before the engine finally gave out. Every time I used it, I thought about that day during the blizzard when I watched her take it from my driveway. Every time I thought about pursuing legal action against her, I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. And every time, I came to the same conclusion. She made a choice, and choices have consequences. The HOA ran smoothly under Pritchard's leadership. We had regular meetings, but they were productive and focused on actual community issues rather than witch hunts for violation notices. People started attending more often because they no longer feared being publicly shamed for having the wrong shade of black on their mailbox. One year, we even threw a neighborhood block party, something that would have been unthinkable under Susan's reign. Someone set up a grill. Kids ran around playing, and adults stood in driveways chatting and drinking beer. It felt like what a neighborhood should feel like, a community of people who chose to live near each other and wanted to make the best of it. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs, when Margaret Wilson came up to me with a knowing smile. "You know, Oliver, I have been thinking about everything that happened with Susan." "Yeah, I think you did the right thing. I know some people thought you were too harsh, pushing for criminal charges and all that, but she needed to face real consequences. If you had just let it go, she would have kept getting worse. Someone had to stand up to her. I just wanted my snow blower back. I never intended for any of this to blow up the way it did. But it needed to blow up. Susan was making everyone miserable. You gave the rest of us permission to finally push back. So thank you." I nodded and flipped another burger. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe pursuing justice, even when it seemed harsh, was the right thing to do. Or maybe I was just stubborn and refused to let Susan get away with stealing from me. Probably a bit of both. The Milwaukee weather being what it is, we had plenty more blizzards over the years. Every time the snow started falling, I made sure to put my snow blower away in the locked shed. I also installed security cameras covering my driveway and garage, just in case. You can never be too careful. Richard Morrison served as HOA president for 3 years before stepping down, citing his desire to spend more time with his grandchildren who had moved to the area. Karen Chen took over, and she proved to be equally competent and reasonable. The nightmare era of Susan Pritchard became something people talked about in hushed tones, a cautionary tale about what happens when HOAs have too much power and the wrong people end up in charge. I stayed in Meadowbrook Heights for another 7 years total before finally deciding to move. Not because of HOA drama, but because I got a job offer in Colorado that was too good to pass up. When I sold my house, the new owners asked me about the neighborhood and the HOA. "It is a good community," I told them honestly. "The HOA is reasonable, the neighbors are friendly, and the location is great. Just make sure you lock up your snow blower." They laughed, not understanding the significance of that advice. I did not elaborate. Some stories are better left untold, at least to the uninitiated. On my last day in Milwaukee, I drove past Susan's old house one more time. A young family lived there now, with 2 kids and a golden retriever that barked at passing cars. The mailbox was a cheerful shade of blue, technically a violation of the old bylaws but perfectly acceptable under the new regime. Somehow, the neighborhood had not collapsed into chaos despite Susan's dire warnings. If anything, it had thrived. I often wondered if Susan ever thought about that day during the blizzard, if she ever regretted taking my snow blower. Did she understand that her 8 years of petty tyranny had primed everyone to turn on her the moment she gave them real cause? Or did she still see herself as the victim, wrongly persecuted for trying to help? I suspect it was the latter. People like Susan rarely develop self-awareness. They go through life convinced that they are right, that their way is the only way, and that anyone who disagrees is either stupid or malicious. The criminal conviction, the prison time, the divorce, the loss of her home and status, none of it probably changed her fundamental belief that she had been trying to help and was betrayed by ungrateful neighbors. But that was not my problem anymore. I had stood up for myself, pursued justice through appropriate channels, and let the system work. Susan had stolen my property, and she had faced appropriate consequences. The HOA had backed me up, the police had done their job, the courts had functioned properly, and justice had been served. And most importantly, I had learned a valuable lesson about HOAs. They are only as good as the people running them. It is not enough to have bylaws and regulations. You need leaders with integrity, common sense, and a genuine desire to serve the community rather than dominate it. Meadowbrook Heights had suffered for years under Susan's leadership, but once she was removed, the community flourished under better guidance. My new neighborhood in Colorado has an HOA too, but it is remarkably low-key. They handle snow removal for the common areas, organize an annual community garage sale, and maintain the neighborhood entrance. That is about it. No violation notices for garbage can visibility, no regulations about mailbox colors, no midnight patrols looking for infractions. Just normal people trying to maintain property values and community standards without being tyrants about it. I still have that video on my phone, the one showing Susan Pritchard stealing my snow blower during the blizzard. Every now and then, when I am scrolling through my old files, I come across it. I watch it for a few seconds, remember that whole surreal chapter of my life, and then move on. Sometimes I imagine an alternate timeline where I did not record the theft, where I just let it go and bought a new snow blower without making waves. Susan would have remained HOA president, probably for years longer. She would have continued harassing neighbors, sending out petty violation notices, and ruling Meadowbrook Heights with an iron fist. More people would have moved away, property values would have declined, and the neighborhood would have developed a reputation as a place to avoid. But that is not what happened. I stood up to her. Other neighbors found their courage and stood with me. The system worked, justice prevailed, and the community became healthier because of it. That moment when Susan walked into the hearing and froze when she saw me, that split second of pure fear when she realized she could not talk her way out of this or intimidate me into silence, that was the moment everything changed. She had spent years making me and other neighbors feel powerless, subject to her whims and arbitrary enforcement of obscure bylaws. But when confronted with clear evidence of actual wrongdoing, all her authority and bluster evaporated. She became just another person who had broken the law and had to face the consequences. I learned something important from the whole experience. Standing up to bullies is hard, especially when they have institutional power behind them. Susan was not just a difficult neighbor. She was the HOA president with years of experience wielding authority over others. Challenging her meant going through official processes, gathering evidence, and being willing to escalate when necessary. It would have been easier to just eat the loss, buy a new snow blower, and avoid the conflict. But easy is not always right. Sometimes you have to fight for what is just, even when it is uncomfortable, even when people warn you about the implications, even when you question whether it is worth the effort. Because if good people always back down to avoid conflict, then bullies win. And communities suffer. The snow in Colorado is different from Wisconsin's snow. It is drier, lighter, easier to move. I bought a smaller snow blower here, nothing as fancy as the one Susan stole. But every time I use it, every time I clear my driveway after a storm, I think about that January blizzard in Milwaukee and the chain of events that followed. I think about Susan's face when she walked into that hearing, the way she froze when she saw me and realized I was not going to let this go. I think about the neighbors who supported me, the police officer who took my case seriously, the district attorney who prosecuted, and the judge who sentenced appropriately. I think about Richard Morrison stepping up to lead the HOA with integrity and turning the community around. Mostly, I think about the importance of standing up for yourself and others, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard, because that is how things change. That is how bullies lose power. That is how communities heal. Susan Pritchard stole my snow blower during a storm. She thought she could get away with it because she was used to getting away with everything. She was wrong. And when she walked into that hearing and saw me waiting to present evidence against her, she froze, because in that moment, she finally understood that her reign was over. Justice is not always swift, and it is not always satisfying in the way you expect. But when the system works, when people stand up for what is right, and when those in power are held accountable for their actions, it makes everything worthwhile. My $1,200 snowblower cost Susan Pritchard her freedom, her position, her marriage, and her home. That might seem like a harsh price, but she chose to pay it when she decided to take what was not hers. I just hope that somewhere, maybe in that Target in Minnesota, Susan finally learned that actions have consequences and that being in a position of authority does not put you above the law. But honestly, I doubt it. People like that rarely change. They just find new people to blame for their problems. As for me, I am content with how everything turned out. I got justice, the community improved, and I learned valuable lessons about standing up to bullies in positions of power. The whole experience made me a stronger person and a better neighbor. And I never have to worry about HOA drama again, because if it ever starts up here in Colorado, I know exactly how to handle it. Document everything. Stand your ground. Trust the system to work if you give it the evidence it needs. And never, ever leave your snow blower unattended during a storm.